Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's De-JOE-tional. Today is Thursday, April 7th. I am coming to you again from Barnes, room 10815. Susan's right next to me, taking a nice little nap. And we are hoping to go home tomorrow. Her numbers look great. Everything is going great. Still a little issue with nausea, but they're thinking that we can manage that from home. So thank you all again for your thoughts and prayers and texts and cards and messages and everything else. We really, really do appreciate and can't thank you enough. So we're going to continue with the next chapter of If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. And today, our chapter is, Oh, hell no. Oh, did Joe just swear? Hell no. Well, maybe I did just then. Anyway, today is about hell. And the author starts by telling a story of a pastor from West Philadelphia. And the pastor starts his message this particular Sunday with, I miss hell. Hell was helpful. Hell was a place I could leverage sin and hold eternal damnation over people's heads. I could get them to do almost anything, volunteer, give, evangelize, vote, whatever needed doing. He explained that hell was kind of a currency that he used. Because if you didn't do it, you're just going to go to hell. And we talked a few weeks ago about how fear is a great motivator. It gets people to do things because they're afraid of what might happen to them. We also talked about how fear can cause people to make choices and lash out and do some things that are kind of unchristian-like. So that's where we're going to dive in a little bit today about living in fear of God. Is that really what God wants for us? Is for us to live in fear. Let me read this little paragraph here for you. The fear of eternal torment tends to drive religious people beyond what seems reasonable, and it does little to perpetuate anything truly loving because it values conversion over conversation. And here's the important part of this whole chapter. Beyond that, it's also driving an exodus out of organized religion, and we can't ignore that. When I talk to several younger-ish people, my kids, other church leaders' kids, other church participants' kids, those kids that are like between 20 and 30 years old, maybe mid-30s, one of the first things they said about not participating in church anymore is that the church is full of hypocrites. Now, we said the same thing when we were kids. People always say Christians are the most judgmental people, but they're not perfect and they think they are and all. I mean, that's the biggest thing that I heard, right? Well, that's what this kind of talks about, is that we still kind of lived with it, still went, still attended, still participated. But this new generation of young people coming up aren't. Remember a few weeks ago when I said the old-time religion, it's good enough for me? Not the case anymore. This is an example of why. It's because this generation doesn't want to live in fear of God, and they definitely don't want to live in fear of being judged by God-like people, followers of God, which is what happens. Instead, we need to create communities where deeply spiritual human beings can gather, people who know that for hungry people, salvation is a plate of rice and beans. For exhausted, sea-battered migrants, it's a soft bed on solid ground. The future of organized religion has got to be built on something more redemptive than damnation avoidance. We cannot build our church body, our church family, on the premise that if you don't, you're going to hell. We've got to give them a positive reason to be part of it. It's kind of like, you remember when, back in the old days, when kids used to act up and they used to say, wait till your father gets home? It was kind of built into our home life that dad was the ruler. The father was the disciplinarian of the house. And in many cases, they still are, but it wasn't really the case at our house. Both parents dished out punishment equally. One did a little bit louder than the other, I'll say, but kids don't want to live. People shouldn't have to live in fear of the wait till your father gets home mentality. Doesn't the existence of hell seem incompatible with the character of a God whose defining trait is love? What is ultimately loving about inflicting suffering on someone who supposedly have limitless affection for, no matter what the reason? We talk about having a limitless love for a God who has a limitless love for us. Yet, we're also told to live in fear of Him. Because if we make the wrong choices, He might send us to hell. That's not really the message that we need to be sending, because it's not the message God is sending. So the other thing about it, and again, talking about the people who, and the hypocrites that we have and the judgmental people that we have, you need to check a lot of boxes in order to condemn someone to hell. You need to believe in God, to imagine you know that God's character intimately, to consent to that God manufacturing a place where God would send human beings for a gruesome and torturous eternity, to be fully certain you know the extensive and precise requirements for such a sentence, and to be sure the person you're condemning meets all of those requirements. And above all, are you ready for this? Be fully convinced that you don't. So not only do we think we know this limitless God, we also think we know what the exact requirements are to get into heaven and the requirements to get into hell. And with that, we also believe that a loving Father is going to send us to a gruesome and torturous eternity. I don't know about that. So, that's that chapter. The next chapter goes on. Let them eat cake. I'm not going to get into why it's called that, but let me see where I'm going to start here. Sorry about this. I'm skipping a lot of this. Remember I said a couple weeks ago that I'm going to skip some of the more controversial parts of the book because it doesn't do us any good to get into a debate about any of this. That's these next few pages here. So here we go. Whatever our religious tradition, we usually imagine that we are erring on the side of goodness and decency when encountering people with whom we disagree, simply because we like to think of ourselves as basically good and decent people. But that's only half the equation. Since we're all understandably prone to self-favoritism, we all think we're doing great, right? We all think we're good people. What we tell ourselves is incomplete without the input of others. Ooh. Consider the experience of those on the receiving end. Do people feel loved by me? And if they don't specifically, why don't they? But if, the author writes here, if I imagine that I'm a loving husband without ever asking my wife if she actually feels loved by me, I'm missing a really important half of the relational equation. So we have a tendency, I say we, the church, not our church specifically, but the church, has a tendency to think that we are better than other people. Whether you intend to make people feel that way or not, we do. Because people that aren't going to church are saying that. Because we've never asked them, hey, how do I make you feel? If you're using the Bible to proof text yourself into being justified for discriminating against someone else, you're probably doing religion and the Bible incorrectly. And you're definitely doing love wrong. I like to believe that we worship a God of love. A God that is understanding. A God that is all-encompassing of everyone. A God that's forgiving and caring. A God who's supportive and comforting. I don't want to believe that I follow a God that is judgmental or condescending or sentencing people to an eternal damnation. But we do. We do those things. We judge people. We condescend. We talk down to people all the time. Your behavior is unacceptable. God would never do that to us. So why are we doing it to them in His name? That's the other part. We're doing it in His name. We don't really know what His word is, really. We know what the men who interpreted the Bible and rewrote the Bible and wrote and rewrote and all that. We know what their intentions were and their words are. So let's just remember that as we move forward in our lives still, as we continue to go through this book. Let's believe in a God that's loving and caring. Let's not be fearful of God. And let's not be judgmental of people and the decisions they make and doing so in God's name. That's God's job. Let's let God do His job. That's all I got for this week. Hopefully we'll see you in a different location next week. Blessings, Godfrey First.